Well, just to review, in Chapter 10, we learned about classroom management. And this chapter, we will be learning about becoming an effective teacher. Being an effective teacher is important because it helps us to have less issues with classroom management and be able to work our class like a well-oiled machine.
Okay, our objectives for this lesson are define motivation and identify instructional factors that increase students' motivation, describe basic steps in planning for instruction and explain how these actions increase learning, and describe essential teaching skills and explain how they promote learning. So for our starter, we're going to have a little discussion. So our two questions are, what is effective teaching and what does effective teaching require? So if you just want to think about that for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then we'll have a discussion about those questions. Okay, so do we have any thoughts about the first question, what is effective teaching?
I feel like that comes through your own opinion, what you feel like an effective teacher can become. So I think as becoming a teacher, you should think about what made other effective teachers, what made you like those teachers, and take that into considering into who you want to become as a teacher.
Yeah, I think pulling from personal experience is definitely important when you're trying to figure out your own philosophy for when you begin teaching. Does anybody else have anything else to either of the questions?
I think a lot about effective teaching is being able to teach student content. So actually giving lessons, but also using student engagement. A teacher will be able to engage students and there's more than just the content going on.
Yeah, we'll talk about different skills later on that will help maximize learning in the students and try to engage and involve the students as much as we can. So yeah, good. Anybody else?
I agree with what Maddie said about how it's we can take from our own personal experiences. And we've seen all through the years on the teachers that really make an effort to, and in the classroom and even out of the classroom, and those teachers that really care will remember what they teach and will be able to use it later on.
Yeah, it's really important to take what you thought was effective and implement that into your own classroom.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide.
So the first requirement of effective teaching is motivation. Motivation is an energizing force that initiates and sustains efforts to reach a goal. So does anyone think they know what two types of motivation are? Just shout them out.
Intrinsic.
Oh my gosh. So we have extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic is motivation that engages you in an activity where you will receive some sort of outside reward. So whether that's grades, so if you get an A, you will get some money or something from your parents. Intrinsic is motivation that involves you in an activity for your own sake. So I decide to work out because I just really want that personal achievement of being healthy and exercising each day. To increase student motivation, first you need to track and maintain students' attention. So this helps them to stay focused and become excited about what they're learning about. Second is personalizing content through real-world applications. So this is making it so it's personal to them and they can relate to it. This helps them to be able to build that connection that, like Michaela said, will help them remember it more, because if the teacher was really involved, really open about it, and helped them to understand what they were learning about, they are more likely to be interactive in the lesson and remember it. Third is promoting student success through open-ended questions, which are questions that allow a variety of answers, and they're all acceptable. You can just give an open question like, what's your favorite color? And for everyone, it's going to be a different answer. But it provides opportunity for students to get their own answer and come up with it on their own. High quality examples are examples where all the information students need to understand is observable to them. So they have an example where they can see what they're trying to understand the topic, and it helps them to be able to take it personally. Presenting challenging tasks is important. You can use this formula, challenge times success, and that creates the amount of motivation to learn. So if you have more challenge, then you'll most likely have more success because the students are more willing to participate, which increases the motivation to learn. And lastly is involvement. Involvement is so important. You want to get your students involved, those that are always raise their hand, maybe give the students that aren't raising their hands an opportunity to be involved, because being involved and actively participating in a learning activity is where students will learn the most, because they're hands-on, they're focused, they're in it, and they're understanding. All of these things help to increase student interest, motivation, but ultimately their learning. So it's really important to include these in when you're planning your effective lesson. Does anyone have any questions real quick? Okay, sweet. The second thing is planning. When planning for an effective lesson and becoming an effective teacher, it's important to include these three main things. First of all is standards. Standards are statements that describe what students should know or be able to know at the end of a time period or the class. And we come up with these standards through the CCSSI, which is known as the Common Core State Standards Initiative. This is a state-led effort launched in 2009, and it established a single set of clear educational standards for all states in essential content areas. So this is the standards that the state creates that teachers have to follow. The students, by the end of the school year, should know these things. And usually they have objectives. So objectives help us to understand the standards. And it's like taking the whole standard as a whole and breaking it up into objectives, so it's easier to take on piece by piece. Assessments are what we use to gather information and make decisions about the students' learning process. So the students, we can test them whenever, how often we want, to make sure that they're understanding the core content that we are giving them and the standards and objectives. This next part is really important because instructional alignment is basically when there's a match between standards, learning, the learning objectives, the activities, and the assessment. We talked about this a little bit in class, and we had to write a little bit about it, but this is the most important part of effective teaching, because if everything isn't connected together and all is cohesive and just goes along with each other, then it's really complicated and things just won't flow. So it's really important that your classroom is aligned together with the standards, assessment, and objectives. All of them are aligned together so that you are able to teach effectively. Any questions?
It's not a question, it's a comment. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
So when we talk about classrooms that are ineffective, often what you identify, even if you didn't know that this was it, is what Hailey's talking about here, is this alignment. So the frustrations that most students have are when like what you're learning in class isn't what's on the test, right? And then everybody's like, wait, what? Like, why is this happening? And so you guys can recognize those inconsistencies, and that's where there are frustrations, both on the side of the teacher and on the side of the student. And so if you're ever feeling that way when you become a teacher, maybe take a look and see if you have that alignment, if all of the things are cohesive, and if you notice that something's off and you're like, oh, this is where I messed up. My assessment doesn't actually assess the standards that I told them that they were learning or whatever. And then you have to adjust one or the other. And so yeah, excellent. You've hit the nail on the head of like what the frustration is, because we've had those discussions before for sure of ineffective classrooms.
Exactly. Sweet. Okay.
Okay, so in order to implement instruction effectively, it is important to develop essential teaching skills, which is the third requirement of effective teaching. So essential teaching skills are the skills that teachers have in order to promote learning and motivation in their students. The first one is teacher beliefs and behaviors. These will influence your classroom learning environment, and when you know this, you'll be able to create an environment that promotes learning and motivation in your classroom. Some of these examples could be caring for your students, having personal teaching efficacy, having high expectations for your students, and having enthusiasm for the content in your class. To go in depth a little bit further, personal teaching efficacy is one of these beliefs, and it's where teachers believe in their abilities to help students regardless of their living situations or the conditions of the school or the support of the school. The next one is organization. Organization includes starting on time, being prepared with materials, and making smooth transitions. When you're organized, it can help you maximize the amount of time that's available for instruction and student learning. Next is the focus. Focus refers to something tangible usually that teachers will use to begin their lessons and illustrate their topics. Focus allows students to be attentive and attracted throughout the entirety of the lesson. In writing, sometimes we call this a hook, and it will grab the student's attention or the reader's attention and continue it through the rest of the piece of work. And this is the same thing in teaching, but it's called the focus. Next is review. Review is discussion and clarification of past content. The purpose of review is to help students recall prior knowledge in order to connect it to new content that they'll be learning. Next is questioning. Questioning is using questions during instruction, calling on students as equally as possible, giving them time to think about their responses, and then prompting them if they're unable to answer. Questioning involves the students and encourages them to think further about the topic that you're learning about. To go in more depth about prompting, it's part of questioning and occurs when teachers provide additional questions and cues when students fail to answer the question correctly. It can promote motivation because they're able to know that they can answer it just with a little bit more help instead of turning the question over to another student. That defeats the purpose of questioning because the student then feels like that they can't answer the question, and that decreases that student's motivation. Next is feedback. Feedback is communication between teacher and students about their learning progress. This can be a question that a student asks and the teacher gives feedback, or it could be written feedback on an assessment or an assignment. Feedback provides students with the information they need to increase their understanding of the topic. And then last is closure and application. Closure is the review at the end of the lesson that helps students organize their thoughts about the topic into simplified ideas. And application is the opportunity to practice what they've just been taught. Closure and application help the students reinforce their understanding of the topic. So it's just like the ending summary. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay.
Okay, now we will do our Quizlet Live so that we can apply what we have been learning. But basically, we're just going to be taking what we have just told you and taught you about, and we're going to have you read a situation and try and figure out what definition or what piece of effective teaching aligns with that scenario.